panel is going to be about working with industry, and we have a really, really informative panel. I couldn't cut us off when we were starting to talk about what you guys were going to talk about. It's so interesting. So Amy Jenkins from Platinum Advisors will introduce the panelists and moderate the panel. And as we get toward questioning, I'll help her cue people up. But let me turn it over to you, Amy.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm actually very fortunate to be moderating a very esteemed panel of colleagues that I'm very proud to work with. You're going to be hearing from three different perspectives, three distinct voices, all who represent the cannabis industry. You'll have an organizational community development voice, legal, as well as industry perspective. So really happy to be here, and thank you for being part of this. This is a critical piece of everything you do as you are beginning to develop your ordinances and determining how you want to regulate cannabis businesses in your community. But before I start, just very briefly, a little bit about my background. I am actually a local government person at heart, though I am now one of the very few cannabis lobbyists in the state that has been representing both local government and now the cannabis industry for the last 3.5 years. I actually got my start working on legislation in 2014, which was essentially the blueprint for the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act. That was certainly what it was called at the time. Then moved into lobbying, representing the Industry Association, 300 members, the California Cannabis Industry Association. And now I've been very involved with Prop 64, the Adult Use Framework. As Jelena and some of the county lobbyists can attest, we work together quite often, and was very involved in also the trailer bill that just passed to merge the medical and the recreational frameworks. But in addition to that, as I indicated, my previous work was in local government. I worked for the League of California Cities as its Director of Public Affairs for 8.5 years. And I also worked in the CAO's office in the County of Solano, where I did all their legislative intergovernmental affairs. So I do understand both perspectives, but again, I certainly welcome and appreciate you being here to get a better sense of the industry perspective, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to work together to craft sensible ordinances in your community that make sense for both the industry as well as the local government entity that represents the constituents. So that said, I'd like to go ahead and just briefly introduce our panel today. We're going to kick it off with Liz Conway. Liz founded Gide Public Affairs in 2014 with the vision to help emerging businesses with government relationships, communicating complex technology and unheard of industries to legislators and regulators. Cannabis came calling, and the firm now represents cannabis industry interests all along the vertical as well as collateral industries with government-facing strategies. Her firm is a national firm operating out of the San Francisco Bay Area, Washington, D.C., and the Miami area. Nicole Neubert is a California business attorney and principal of the go-to cannabis business law firm Clark Neubert, LLP, serving as outside counsel to the cannabis industry. She has wide-ranging legal experience and has been focusing on client commitment and advising operators through the transition from prohibition to regulation. Because of her active engagement in the regulatory implementation of California's medicinal and adult use licensing, she serves as policy committee leadership for the California Growers Association, another very active association here in Sacramento. She's on the board of California NORML and is one of 16 members to serve on the State Treasurer John Chung's Cannabis Banking Working Group. And I know for those of you in the banking discussion earlier today, she was certainly recognized, and that was a very robust conversation. Lastly, Kimberly Cargile, who I've worked with for many years. She's been dedicated to the advancement of the medical cannabis industry in California for over a decade. Over 15 years as a cultivator and 10 years operating dispensaries. She has gained invaluable industry experience, allowing for her continuous expansion of knowledge in the areas of science and law on medical cannabis. She is CEO and Executive Director of the Therapeutic Alternative, a locally permitted dispensary here in Sacramento that we have frequent tours of. I bring legislators and local governments there all the time. As a consultant, she has successfully helped many, many companies open or transition into the regulated marketplace and her experience has earned her the title of an expert in the medical cannabis industry. So very, very pleased to have all three panelists here. We're going to kick off the discussion with Liz Conway, who's going to come up and do a presentation on working with the industry. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for the nice intro, Amy. And as Amy mentioned, I'm Liz Conway, and my firm Gide, we work nationally. We work on both sides of what I would call emerging technologies, emerging industries. So we are advisors to legislators and lawmakers when they have questions about, hey, how should we do this? On subjects anywhere from cannabis to alternative aviation, other emerging agriculture and biotech. And so when Jolena asked me to speak today, I thought, well, I love this topic because it is one of the fastest emerging industries. And because I do sit on both sides, I think I can speak to where have we come from some of you who weren't there and maybe where we're going. So let's see if we can roll a presentation that'll guide the session today. Just remembering that with the legacy of this industry, it's an old industry, but the animosity and the fears that both sides experienced from the war on drugs are very real, and they do extend into the relationships of today. I don't have another client where there have been times when I go into an executive or official meeting and I've had a little bit of hesitation that I might not come out, walking deep into the bowels of a law enforcement agency. So I know from a personal experience that there's that moment when you catch your breath and you wonder, is this all going to be okay? And thankfully, thus far, it has been. The second point under our legacy was collaboration has been difficult, so we wonder today, why is it that we're having trouble talking to us and remembering that we have over 40 years of really not talking to each other? Then you understand where you are when you're sitting across a table and maybe everyone's playing it close to the vest. And finally, we've got the ongoing risk that this is a Schedule I drug from the federal perspective. So I know everyone is worried about the legal risks, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the session. But, we can't mistake that California voters have spoken on the issue, both of the medical and the adult use. And so in that context, it's incumbent on us to move forward. So the second major thing that I'd like to talk about then on working with the industry and the road to that is 20 years of the gray area. After we passed Prop 215, we've been operating, the industry has been operating and government has been operating without regulatory definition. And when you spend that much time, by virtue of just spending 20 years doing that, you get into habits of thinking, habits of working, and those are sometimes hard to unwind. I'm going to talk to you about a paradox that I see, some tension in working with the industry, and that is the paradox of gray growth, which is that the industry has had to grow up in this gray area, and the government gets frustrated because you all think, well, it's been 20 years, why don't you have better processes? Why don't you have infrastructure built? And remembering that wherever the industry built infrastructure, it was at risk of that being seized or raided. Sometimes you walk into an operation, and it's only recently, I would say in light of the Cole memo and the MCRSA, that the industry has been able to invest in embedded infrastructure and processes that are stepping into what you would be more used to seeing from other industries. That's not an excuse, it's just a reminder for both of us that that's where we've come from, and very recently. And finally, in that gray area, I would say that we've had 2 years of very rapid growth. I've not seen any other industry, not drones, not Bitcoin, the other places where I'm working, that is growing as quickly as this industry is growing and trying to develop protocols that quickly. So moving down our path from the legacy to the gray area into some of the growing pains, and I'm sure you all can recount more. But I'll start by saying what I've already said, that as with any nascent industry, everyone has to kind of show their cards and say, we know you don't have a rule yet, but we want to be here and make rules with you. And you guys are longing for more information and more expertise coming out of the industry, and I think that we definitely on this side of the table are seeing that rapidly accelerate. On that topic, I'll say that just because cannabis is involved for you doesn't mean that you have to create a brand new rule. I would encourage you to look at the rules that you already have around industrial growth, industrial use, agriculture, and agriculture use, and apply those same rules to this industry. There are going to be areas that are new, but the counties that I see that are trying to reinvent the wheel just because the word cannabis is involved are stumbling until they finally figure out, wait, we already have a rule about fertilizer, we already have a rule about pesticide use, we already have a rule about farming with water and limits and wells. So I really encourage you to bridge that gap and one of those growing pains by looking back at what you've already created in your area. The second thing is to be really curious. I don't see enough curiosity, and when someone's growing this quickly, it will serve you to get out there, and you're doing that today, and touch and feel, what do these products look like? This is not a product that is sold in a sandwich baggie like you might have gotten your freshman year of college. In fact, we've got some products here today, and I encourage you to come up here and look. These are child-proof. They are labeled. They have got, this is a radical departure from what many people experienced in college. And unless you're curious, you will always have that resistance to understanding what it is you're making rules about. The growing pain, acknowledge that you've got a hard job, just say it. But we've done this before. We've done it with things like HIPAA. We've done it with healthcare reform. We got in, we learned what it was about, and we did it. So I just don't want to undercount the frustration that we're going to encounter, and that we can do this. And then another one of your growing pains I know is, what are your neighbors doing? And everybody's got FOMO, fear of missing out. The county next door is doing this. What are we going to do? Again, I would say, look at your own county. Look at what you've done in the past. You can take some cues from post-alcohol prohibition, dry counties. I came from a dry county in Louisiana. I grew up there. I know exactly what happens in a dry county. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily true for this industry, but having a lot of fear about what your neighbor is doing rather than looking really carefully at what your county or your city needs to do, go through the process. And that takes us down the road to getting to tomorrow. I've worked with multiple counties, a couple of cities, and I've worked in Washington and Colorado. I know you had a great speaker earlier giving you that perspective, but I would say to get to tomorrow, you have to listen to each other. You're here doing that today. But you also have to educate yourselves and educate the community and allow them to educate you back. You can't host too many public forums. It just gives you a lot of cover to create and take the time to have those kinds of conversations, because at the end of the day, those are the places that have succeeded in other states as well as in our own state. The ones that are succeeding are going through the discipline of listening. Assemble your internal stakeholders more often than you think you need to, and hold them to a discipline. For example, Denver had a task force, and they started with a small one, thinking, oh, it's public health, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and at the end of the day, involving public health, agriculture, industry, security, fire, retail, tax, law enforcement, industry members from the cannabis industry, communications staff, so that someone could talk to the media about what the city and county were doing, utilities, and then consistently meeting meant that when an issue came up, they had someone at the table who was ready to talk to it because they had been going through and listening in the process. And then the final thing on getting to tomorrow, I'll say, is don't eat the whale. And if you're awake, what that means is, I talk to a lot of counties who want to do everything. Why is it that you're in a rural area and you think suddenly that you're equipped to do agriculture? Like, there's no reason you have to do everything today. Look at what you specialize in. Look at who you've got in your inspections team and your fire team and say, what's the right size for us right now? And when I put my industry hat on, I think, wow, it would be better for the industry to have your county do it right with us than take on everything just because you think you have to take on everything. Don't eat the whale, it's just like everything else. Just because it has the word cannabis in front of it doesn't mean everything should change. Similarly, if you're in an agricultural community that has never had industrial oversight and you don't have inspectors to do that type of industry inspection, hold off. Go big with agriculture and then step into the other areas. And we get finally to working together, all of which this has hopefully set the stage for you. First is acceptance, whether you like it or not. Just the counties who just sit back and say, all right, fine, it's here, I've got to work with it, get through that. The people in Denver said this early on. They said, once we woke up and said, oh my gosh, it's here, what do we do? Things got way easier than saying, it's not coming, it's not coming, it's not here, it's not here. Trust that both sides are going to make mistakes. So acceptance, trust. People are going to make mistakes. It's not because they're criminal. It's because we're all learning together. It's not because you guys are law enforcement. It's because we're learning together. That's both sides have to do that. And communicate. As I mentioned earlier, over communication through public forums, through your working groups, is a best practice on this. Set aside your feelings about the movement and start talking about the practical application. And with that, I will turn it over.
All right. Hi, everyone. That was great, Liz. Thanks so much for that. The road theme is going to look familiar. All right, so who are we talking about when we talk about the industry? I want to pick up on a theme that Liz talked about, which is this idea of gray growth. It's important, especially at this point where we are in implementing regulations, it's really important to understand the difference between criminal and unregulated. Okay, so we've heard there's been discussion today, and it is the case that a fair bit to a large amount of the cannabis that's grown in California does enter the black market and goes out of state. But that does not mean that the entire population of the folks that you will be working with and who are looking to be regulated and get licensed in your counties are criminal operators. Criminals are trespassers who have no regard for environmental considerations, who use violence, and have no interest in any of the things we are talking about here today. Unregulated operators, on the other hand, are folks who grow medical cannabis or who manufacture it or who sell, and have been doing so under California's medical marijuana rules. They may not have been in compliance with your local ordinances because not many of them have allowed for a lot of those operations, but they are very much interested in being regulated, and they want to work with you. They want to be regulated, they want to pay their fees, they want to pay their taxes because they too want to raise their families and have legitimate businesses and regular jobs and bank accounts just like the rest of us. Okay, so that's the first kind of distinction I want to make when we're talking about who are we dealing with. If I'm coming to talk to you on behalf of a client, or folks are coming into a board of supervisors meeting and they're standing up and saying, I'm an operator here and I want to be regulated, those are well-meaning, well-intentioned, unregulated operators. They are not criminals. Okay, so that's the first thing that I just I wanted to say. Getting a little more granular than that, the kinds of folks that you're going to be interacting with as you work with applicants, I would put them in kind of two categories. And this is an oversimplification, but you've got kind of your pioneers, right? So these are the folks who have been in the industry, who have been operating for 20 plus years, who know how to grow cannabis. They know the science behind the plant and the products. They really know what works from a practical perspective of operation, and they have been the hands in the dirt kind of folks. Now we have, within the last couple of years of this new regulatory environment, okay, we have the entrepreneurs, so we have investors, we have money. These are the folks involved in the
application process or these operations who have the more traditional business acumen. Okay, so there's a continuum of experience between the operators who have the real industry experience and understand what it really means to grow a plant, what that cycle looks like. And then you have the entrepreneurs who have business expertise but may not really totally understand that part of it. And so I like to say that this is kind of a symbiotic relationship. They need each other, especially at this point where operators are required to have such larger amounts of capital in order to pay for all of the many regulatory requirements of them. They especially need those more traditional business types. So you're going to see groups come in to apply for these licenses that are made up of both. And sort of my advice here would be, don't discount the pioneer operator who doesn't look like the investor type that you are used to seeing when someone's applying for a development project. Don't judge the book by the cover, I guess, is some of what I'm saying. All right, so what? Right here I wanted to talk about some of the legal, the types of entities, what operators have been, the system that they've been operating under over the past 20 years. Because you've got people coming and applying and they've got different types of business entities saying that they're a collective. What is a collective? Okay, so a collective is the legacy system, but a collective, that word, okay, it doesn't actually have any sort of meaning under California. You're not going to find a collective in the corporations code, okay? So collective is an umbrella term that has been used to refer to various types of business entities that qualified patient collectives have used to operate in compliance with the medical marijuana laws under Prop 215 and the Medical Marijuana Program Act and all those laws that are in the Health and Safety Code. Okay, so the things that are in place now as opposed to where we're going to go next year. So the entity types, there's a consumer cooperative, so that's an actual entity type that exists under California law. It's called a consumer cooperative corporation. It's a type of corporation. Lots of those kind of going back in time. They were set up in the early 2000s into really even until about 5 years ago. You're going to see a lot of co-ops. You will still see unincorporated associations. The medical marijuana laws and the Attorney General guidelines that have been the guidelines under which these businesses have been operating. It allows for an unincorporated association. So just because you see that doesn't mean it's not compliant. Mutual benefit corporations, another type of corporation under the corporations code. These are typically nonprofit. They don't have shareholders. They have members. Okay. Public benefit corporations. These are both different. Mutual and public are two different types of a benefit corporation, both entities, legal entities that exist under the corporations code. And then you will also see stock corporations. People refer to these as C corps, but that's a tax term. So you might see a stock corporation or an LLC with nonprofit operations, all right? And the point here is that a stock corporation that operates as a nonprofit and complies with that element of the Health and Safety Code is still a collective in compliance with current California law. So just because it's a stock corp or just because you don't see mutual benefit corporation in front of it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't currently comply. It might not, depending on how it operates, but the form of entity itself is not necessarily the determining factor. The collective has required there to be this legacy system and what's currently in place. Requires there to be a continuous either loop or circuit of membership. Okay, so these qualified patient collectives, that's what they are. They're groups that are made up of qualified patients who collectively or cooperatively associate. That's what the statute says. And that's where we get the idea and the concept of a collective. And that has required everything, meaning the cultivation and the manufacturing and the transportation and the sale, all to happen within a closed loop or a closed circuit of membership, of collectives that organize and cooperate together. So the point here is that operations have been totally vertically integrated, everything under one roof up to this point. And now we're moving to a system where every single aspect of the business will be separated out, okay? So we've got this new thing called commercial cannabis activity. This will be under the state regulated system. It will be allowed, those operators will be allowed to operate for profit. Whereas under the legacy system, no one is allowed to sell cannabis for a profit. That's literally what the statute says. It doesn't say the entity has to be a nonprofit entity. So under the new system, what you'll see are these legacy entities either being converted to stock corporations, if that's possible, depending on the form of the entity, the form of the membership, change to some other form of an entity, or a new entity altogether will have to be organized. In a lot of places where it's a consumer co-op, that's probably what's gonna have to happen, because there's just really not a way that I can see of converting a consumer co-op to a stock corporation without bringing all of your members along as owners of that new company. And that's not typically what's, there will be some where they want to do that, but that's not usually what will happen. So the point here is that to understand, this is what operators are having to deal with. They have to comply with current California law, but they're looking forward to being regulated next year. So please be flexible and open-minded in terms of the need to change entity form, is the point here. Okay? These will typically be stock corporations or LLCs next year, would be my guess. Nonprofits will still be allowed. They won't be required to operate as a for-profit, though reality, I suppose, does inform that. And then, as I mentioned, there will be these new, whereas everything was under one roof before, now there are these 5 distinct categories of state licensed activity. So, the when, right now, lots of activity around local ordinances and the state getting their regulations in order. January 2018, state licensing opens, which I know you've heard lots about today. We just heard from Lori at lunch that they are on track to issue that license on January 2nd. I have every confidence they will do that. So that will be what happens January 2018. July 2018, there's a regulatory deadline for operators who want to continue operating as commercial cannabis operators. So again, the distinction in the mind being collective activity, which it has been the legacy system nonprofit. Commercial cannabis activity is the new state regulated activity that can be for profit. So for operators who apply by July 2018 and want to operate as a commercial cannabis business, they will be able to do that if they apply by that deadline. If they don't apply by that deadline, they still have the protection of state law. The collective does not go away until early 2019, okay? So people who are operators who are operating in your counties, just because they haven't applied by July of 2019, because they may not be able to if they don't have an ordinance to apply under for a local permit, it doesn't mean that suddenly as of July 2018, everyone's illegal. That's not what it means. It means that they don't have the ability to operate as a commercial cannabis business under the state regulatory system. They will still have immunity under the collective ordinance in the health and safety, or the collective statute in the health and safety code under 11362.775 until early 2019, when that statute will be repealed. Okay, the collective statute will be repealed 1 year after the state posts a notice on its website that it has started issuing state licenses. So if that really is on January 2nd of 2018, they post that notice, January 2nd of 19, that section goes away and no more collectives. Okay, that's the point at which we'll have a very black and white, either you have a local permit and a state license or you're operating illegally. Okay.
Could you give the number again? That 22, whatever.
Oh, so it's Health and Safety Code section 11362.775. That is the statute that's on the books today that allows collectives to operate. It gives them immunity from criminal conviction for engaging in cultivation, possession for sale, transportation, and leasing a space.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, where? Your county, okay? No surprise here. So the point is that no operator gets to get a state license unless they get a local permit. That's really the long and the short of it. Yes, we can get into the nuances of, oh, are they, in compliance with a local ordinance or not. Just the bottom line is, if you have a permitting ordinance and they don't have a permit, then they don't get, they don't have a license, they don't get a license. So if you want to regulate, if your county wants to regulate, the Board of Supervisors is going to have to act to, in some way, allow that activity and a process for applying. Whether that's a truncated version of amending the zoning code and allowing folks to operate or to apply under, you know, an already established system, which I highly recommend, or if it's doing a full-blown, you know, new commercial cannabis title in your ordinance. One of those things is going to have to happen. Okay, because as we heard from Amber Morris in the other room earlier today, you know, the regulators are not able to issue a state license unless they have confirmed that the operator is not violating the local ordinance. There's a rebuttable presumption that the operator is in compliance if you don't answer by a certain timeline, but none of you are gonna, that's not gonna be a problem because we're all gonna have this in place by, right? Yeah. Right. Not a problem. I can tell you all are super prepared in here. I can tell. All right, so how are we going to do this? So I just touched on this. So passing regulating ordinances. So use examples of counties who have done this, have done this and are doing it successfully. I really like the approach of using what you already have, which is another point that Liz made, that you don't have to reinvent how to issue a regulatory permit. You all already know how to do that. Your planning departments know how to determine whether or not a use complies with the zoning codes that already exist. So I think it's a much simpler process to amend the zoning code to add additional allowed uses in those particular zones. You can be as restrictive as your community requires you to be in that respect by, you know, curtailing the zoning codes that are allowed. And then to the extent you want to add in these other regulatory requirements, have that just as part of the regulatory permit process. Much easier process. You can decide the level of scrutiny for each of those, but that's what I think is probably the simplest. And again, Liz touched on this. I'm going to reiterate it because in my experience, this has been a real challenge, especially or even in counties where they've gone through a very robust process of educating the Board of Supervisors, having public hearings where folks are able to comment on the ordinance, the unanimous approval of the Board of Supervisors for a permitting ordinance, 2 years of operators putting lots of money and time into applying, to have the net result at the end being this many applications approved. Okay, 0. It's a gigantic waste of everyone's time. The county, all of the time and resources and frustration that you put into it, right? And the time and the money that these operators put in to end up at the end with no permit because the public couldn't be brought, or at least a contingent of the public that was important to the electeds could not be brought around. So I can't emphasize enough that it's important when the county is educating itself and is getting on board with this, as you all are doing here, and it's wonderful to see all of you, that outreach to the public and to helping the public understand that this is not something to be afraid of, or if it is, what are the fears and how can we address those issues is really important, because otherwise you will, you may end up wasting your own time and resources by going through this process and not being able to actually pull the trigger at the end. That's all I'll say about that. And then reaching out to experts. So, this conference it's amazing that this conference is happening here in Sacramento. I know a lot of you came from very far away, and there are folks within your own organizations that weren't able to be here who will be involved in the implementation. So to the extent that, your counties want to have presentations by folks like the lovely women on this panel or other panels, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to help and to answer questions along all of those lines.
Well, I am so honored to be here today. You know, I've been a patient's rights advocate for 10 years, and 10 years ago, the city of Sacramento looked at me the same way you all are looking at me today, and they were very confused and scared by what I was trying to do. But today, they sent their friends and family to me so I can help them find non-toxic alternatives to pharmaceuticals. And I have brought a number of products here today, and I would be happy to, number one, answer any of your questions about specific illnesses or disorders and what administrative techniques or cannabinoid profiles we recommend. And number two, if anyone wants to do a tour, our dispensary is right down the street, and I would be happy to give you a tour today or tomorrow if you're going to be around. So, half of my time is spent running a therapeutic alternative. It is a city of Sacramento regulated, permitted, and highly taxed dispensary. And we've been in operation since 2009. We are within 300 feet of a park, a school, a church. We are in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods of Sacramento, East Sacramento, the fabulous 40s, very conservative neighborhood. And over this time, we have won over not only our city, but our neighborhood, our neighbors, and we have proved that medical cannabis businesses can make a positive impact on their community and can be a part of the overall natural health care that a city should be providing to its citizens. So I made this short video about, 3 or 4 years ago when I was inviting all of our city council members on tours, and one in particular, still to this day, I ask her every 6 months. I will not give up. She will come someday, hopefully. But I made this video for her because she didn't want to personally come on a tour, so I took the tour to her. So I thought this would be a great video just to show you all of what a dispensary is, because you know a picture is worth 1,000 words. And every week I do tours for local cities, counties, state officials to show them who we are, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. You know, I've been standing up for patients all these years because they're just like you. Our patients look just like you. And they are too sick or too scared because of the stigma to stand up for themselves. So that's why I do that, and that we are there at a therapeutic alternative to provide quality controlled medicine for our patients in a variety of holistic services. And I highly recommend implementing regulations in your localities to provide your citizens with alternative health therapies like a therapeutic alternative is. Now, let's see if it'll work.
Welcome to a therapeutic alternative. We are a medical marijuana dispensary regulated by the city of Sacramento. We are located in the medical district of Midtown, downtown Sacramento, close to 3 major hospitals, major cancer center, pharmacies, and doctor's offices. A therapeutic alternative, how may I help you? Yoga's gonna be at 6 o'clock tonight. Okay, thanks, bye. So anytime a patient comes to a therapeutic alternative, they're greeted at our door by our security guard, licensed by the state of California, who checks for their doctor's recommendation and their California ID. If they have those things, we welcome them into the lobby and we have them sign up with us, which is a 4-page application going over their medical history, a medical liability release, membership guidelines, and a membership collective agreement. We also verify their recommendation with the doctor and verify their doctor with the California Medical Board. Once a patient is verified, we give them a tour and show them around and focus on education about the cannabinoids and the terpenes. Try to find out exactly why they're using cannabis, what symptoms they're looking to cover, and what products we can provide to them to cover those symptoms. We go over our test results. Everything here, every product is lab tested for contaminants like mold, mildew, pesticides, bugs, solvents of any kind. We also test for the cannabinoid profile. We have a wide variety of products, everything from tinctures, capsules, edibles, concentrates, vaporizers, and a wide variety of different herbs. We can tailor the type of administration and the strain of cannabis with the correct cannabinoid profile to the patient This is one reason why patients need dispensaries so that they can get the right type of medication for them. We have many services here that are complimentary for our patients. We have Reiki, massage, acupressure, sound therapy, stress reduction therapy, meditation. And what we're trying to do here is provide more than one alternative therapy for our patients. Our ultimate goal is to heal the patient.
I didn't go the traditional medicine with the chemo and the radiation and all the therapies. Instead, I've always believed in the body being given the right tools can maybe fix itself. And so that's the direction I went. Also, the chemo and the traditional medicine wasn't a very good outlook for me. I was never going to feel good again. I really didn't have any choice but to suffer my pain in silence or do something that was natural, which is what I believe medical marijuana is.
This is a natural medicine that's been used for thousands of years, and it has many scientifically based studies that support it, and we're seeing those patients on a daily basis keep coming back because it is helping them.
If you have whatever problem, they know which medication to suggest to help you, and you're just like a family. It's everyone is so relaxed. It's a great place.
There are many dispensaries in Sacramento, but not all of them provide the services that we provide and the lab-tested products and the knowledgeable staff that we provide. So we have a lot of doctors recommending patients to us who have never used cannabis before because they know that when they come here, they're going to get the education that they need to find the medicine that's right for them. So thank you so much for taking a few minutes to have a little tour. I recommend local governments engaging with the industry when you're going to look at regulating this industry in your county. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and the industry wants to answer the hard questions. When you come into a tour with us, we show you our security, we show you our safes, we show you our cash handling procedures. We can answer any question that there is. There's nothing off limits. And I encourage you to engage and ask the questions that are scaring you to the industry. How do they handle those problems? You know, I've been in the industry 15 years, publicly on the news saying, I need banking. I've never been robbed. We've never had an incident at our dispensary. There was actually a study done in Sacramento was the city that the study was done to, and the study came out that showed that directly surrounding the dispensaries is actually safer than as you go further out from the dispensaries, the crime rises. And our chief of cannabis regulation, who was recently appointed to the position, publicly stated a few weeks ago that the park near a therapeutic alternative has no rise in incidence in people using cannabis. The schools, there is no rise in incidence with cannabis in the schools around us. We've been there with kids walking home from school for almost 10 years now, and not one child has ever knocked on our door. So the school across the street from us gave us a letter of recommendation for the Planning Commission. And this is just showing you that a lot of these fears and a lot of these stigmas are not based in reality. They're based in hearsay and miseducation. And so that's why I'm such an advocate of just going and talking to the industry, asking if you can see their cultivation sites, asking if you can see the manufacturing sites, and asking them the hard questions and coming up with solutions together, because there are solutions to a lot of the fears and a lot of the suggested problems that our industry is stereotyped to bring with it. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, let's give another round of applause to our panelists. So before we break out for additional questions, just a couple points I want to reaffirm that I think all the panelists focused on, but in my experience as well, I actually have about 12 different cannabis clients in this space in addition to the association that I work with, the California Cannabis Industry Association. And to Kimberly's point and all the panelists' point, the people that I work with, the members of industry that we are all involved with are very, very committed to operating in a regulatory environment. The individuals that we often hear about anecdotally, the illegal diversion of water, the trespassing on and on public lands to conduct cannabis cultivation. These are individuals that are not going to be looking for licenses in communities. But there is a very robust cannabis space that's very committed and really wants to work with local governments. So I would just re-emphasize the fact that definitely reach out. And also tours have been an outstanding way to really get to know the industry better. I host tours on a regular basis. I use Kimberly all the time. I just had the Senate Budget and Fiscal Review Committee chair come and spend an hour touching and feeling products. I think it's really important. I think it's really important that you get that added exposure because there are, again, very, very good actors in this space like Kimberly that are very, very dedicated to being good stewards in their communities. They want to generate tax revenue for their communities, and they're raising families in your communities, and they want to be doing that without fear of their doors getting kicked in. So I think that's a really important point to emphasize. I'd also focus on the community engagement component, which everybody stressed as part of their talk. Community engagement is key. There is a lot of fear out there. I can cite countless examples of work that we've been doing in the city of Sacramento and other jurisdictions, and I do find that when we bring different segments of the business community and other stakeholder groups to different cannabis operations, it really does truly change their perspective. So I think that's incredibly important also. So again, I really appreciate the work that these panelists are doing in their communities and on behalf of the industry, and we'd love to take questions from the audience. So yes, sir.
I have a question to start off for Nicole. I had asked our county council and they were unaware of anything, but during our lunch we had a speaker that's mentioned something about having a city-owned dispensary, which seemed to be unique. But my question is, do you know of any pathway where in the county we could do a public benefit corporation, and instead of us getting a 5% tax, excise tax, and a small portion, we could actually be the person that subcontracts out to somebody to grow or operate a dispensary, and we get the larger percentage of the back end?
Interesting. Interesting question. What county are you from? I can't see.
San Joaquin.
San Joaquin, okay. There's not, this might get a little out of my, in terms of just public law, in terms of laws that would be applicable to the county, in terms of what it's allowed to be, the business it's allowed to be in. But I would guess, is this on?
It is.
Okay. My inclination on what would be a challenge about that would be getting buy-in for the council itself to be actively in the business, right? While federal law remains such as it is. If you could get over that hurdle, I imagine that's what you're hearing from county council.
That's exactly what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Then, if you could get over that, that would be the biggest, I think that's going to be your biggest challenge. But setting aside the federal issue, again, if there are other folks who have other ideas about this, I don't think the county is prohibited from, engaging in a business. I'm not going to say the cannabis business necessarily, but
I was just thinking maybe through a public benefit corporation, we might be able to structure it.
Possibly. I mean,
in a manner.
Theoretically.
But you're not aware of any pathway for that?
I'm not, as I say, I'm not aware of any county kind of looking at that yet. It's very.
It's a businessman's approach.
It's very cutting edge. I like it. I'd be interested in looking into it more. I wish I was more prepared to give you a better answer right now, in terms of, what potentially could be the complications for the county. I mean, generally speaking, can a public benefit corporation be organized in a way that allows for the kind of business model you're looking at? Certainly. Whether the county can be involved in it, as it's kind of a different question that I probably need to look more specifically into for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Mary Glassman, Assistant Treasurer Tax Collector from Monterey County, and we managed our first quarterly collection in April. And I'm curious because I agree that we should be very much involved with reaching out to the industry because it's very tentative right now, and people need trust on both sides. And I'm just wondering though, in the industry, is there a collaborative operation in the industry like local businesses do with each other? Because I don't know how much they compete versus, we have to keep in mind, for instance, the proprietary information we receive. And I don't know how protected they are themselves or if they're actively involved in reaching out as well. And how we can reach those kinds of groups if they're there.
Around the state, there are business organizations. As a nascent industry, it's not unusual that you still have within those organizations a lot of disagreement about how things should go. And so because any of those organizations is covering such a huge breadth of everything from cultivation to manufacturing to retailing, you are going to have some disagreement. But I think if you reach out to those organizations, and I do think there is a group, maybe two in Monterey that I could put you in touch with. They're going to have disagreement, but they're still going to want to talk to you as a group and individually there. And
we're invoicing hundreds, so yeah, they're
there. And if they're willing to be a part of a group like that, I think they will talk to you both as a collectively and then individually. So
they're really excited. We had to establish a special place to receive the cash payments safely. And one of the things we wanted to do on our big white wall was collect their logos and put them up there. And they were like, oh yeah, So maybe that kind of thing, just to make them understand that, to us it's a business tax, just like any business tax. And but we're also very careful about, by appointment, not letting them cross each other's paths because we don't always know what their relationships are.
I also wanted to point out that we have two major trade organizations in California, and if you contacted them, the California Cannabis Industry Association and the California Growers Association, each of those organizations, which are major trade organizations that lobby for regulations in the state, on the state level, they have members probably in your area, and they could get you in contact with those members. And typically those people who are involved with the trade organizations are more apt to work on education and really be on the cutting edge of trying to educate government both on the local and state level. So.
And to Kimberly's point, I do represent one of those associations, and we are actually doing a lot of work in Monterey County at the moment because I know firsthand some of the things that you're experiencing, and so there's a real concerted effort on the part of the statewide associations, both CCIA and CGA, which is their acronyms, to begin organizing a little bit better down there. And I think what you'll also find too is, and I don't ever like to generalize, but we talked a lot about the gray market. And so a lot of these operators have been operating in the shadows, and there are some challenges as it relates to trust. But as we become more public and we are increasing in numbers, both associations on a regular basis, I think you're going to start to see a lot more coming out of the shadows, and also a lot more opportunity to build consensus. Next question, yes?
Thanks for sharing all your presentations and stories. I think it's funny that each of your presentations had a little bit to do with breaking down the stereotypes about the industry, about being criminals or these, stoners or whatever. But at the same time, I feel this kind of reverse stereotype of us in government, I'm from LA County, as this very old school, traditional, buy weed in baggy type, type. And I think it's worth pointing out that a lot of us are aware of the good actors and the good industry people because we are interfacing and we are talking, we are doing visits, and not everybody, but a lot of us try to go with this or understanding the diversity of the community. But at the same time, I think a big concern of government is for people who don't have that voice, the bad actors per se, and people who live in low-income neighborhoods or areas of light, and their concerns about the bad actors. And the experiences they have with them, right? And that's what really is our biggest concern. Honestly, if you guys were just the only operators, like, go for it, have fun.
Mhm.
So, I understand you saying educate that community so we don't have a mini problem. But there's limit to what we can do when people experience the bad dispensaries, So I'm curious as to what the industry is doing to yourself regulate each other and raise the whole industry up, and also go out to the public and not just the good, your good neighbors, but also to areas where people are negatively impacted, and show them what you guys are showing us now.
Yeah, really good points. And I'm going to bring you along with me when I need to talk to folks in the county that aren't as open-minded. So you made a couple good points in there, and I want to address both of them. What is the industry doing to raise the level of operation? Well, I think they're doing, a lot. I think they're very involved in these trade organizations we're talking about. They are themselves organizing groups within communities to bring operators together, to have to have better standards just across the board. As regulation is implemented, everyone will be required to rise to that level of the state regulation. It will be more standardized. And to the second point about the experiences that folks are having with bad operators, that is certainly a reality. I would say that regulating and licensing operators is the way to thwart those bad operators, because when you don't regulate, from a county perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, you don't know who's the good one or the not good one, okay? But once you have gone through a vetting process and you have evaluated the locations that are appropriate and the operators that are appropriate, you know who's licensed and who's not. It makes it much easier to enforce against the unregulated operators. And to the extent that there are problems with the regulated operators, though I really, truly, there won't be many. There aren't complaints. If you look at communities like Oakland or San Francisco that have had dispensaries for a very long time, there are very little in the way of complaints about those operators or law enforcement calls out to them. And certainly there will be, I see a hand shooting up in the back. I'm going to get an example of one that I work. And so certainly that can be the case in certain instances. But the point is that if you know who is licensed and who's not, then you can enforce against the unlicensed operators. And when you have problems with the licensed operators, at least you know who to help hold accountable. When you don't regulate, it's just a total scattershot approach. So those would be my comments.
And I want to add a little bit to that. So cannabis is in your community. There are recreational users and there are medical users in your community. And so it's a matter of supply and demand, or commerce. The people who want to use cannabis are going to use it, and they're going to go to wherever there is a place to purchase it, whether that is an unregulated place or a regulated place. Obviously, people want to go to a regulated place. People want consumer protections. They want to go to a business that has a local permit and is paying taxes. And so it's a matter of transitioning into understanding that it's there, and a lot of the problems come when it's not regulated. Once again, the problems are coming when it's not regulated. So as a government, you set up the rules, and if people don't follow the rules, you shut them down. You have to have the checks and the balances, right? You can't just say, I'm hoping that you're going to do all these wonderful things for the community. You actually have to do inspections. In the city of Sacramento, we have random inspections every month, making sure that we are following all the rules, and we have annual permits. If we don't follow the rules, we don't get our permit next year. So there are solutions to the problems, and it's a matter of supplying your community with the right businesses, the right places to go in every neighborhood. Every neighborhood deserves to have a grocery store and a pharmacy and an alternative health center dispensary. Every neighborhood wants a bar, and every neighborhood, wants a medical cannabis dispensary. I mean, people voted for this. So it is, a lot of this, the problems, I'm gonna, I hate to do this, but place it back on the government. You're the one who has to stop it. You have to have regular inspections and code enforcement, and you have to shut down the bad actors. You really have to be strong on your enforcement.
Okay, I would just, one quick point I would add too is we are beginning to see some self-policing within the industry. A lot more recently. It's going to be very, very expensive to comply in a regulated environment. There's also the taxation component. And so what I'm hearing from the industry is they are just as invested in weeding out the bad actors if they intend to fully comply, because it affects their bottom line. So we hope that, again, as the regulatory system rolls out, we're going to be able to address that both as industry partners with the local government entity as well as the state. I think I saw him back here that was waiting patiently. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm Monica Brown from Solano County. I want to keep it with small businesses. We have a Budweiser plant, and that's fine, I like alcohol. But the point is, it's big. I want to keep it so that a dispensary is owned by somebody different from growing, owned by somebody different from transportation, so that everybody has access to a job, everybody has access to a good living. So here's my question. How do I write that up in the regulations?
First, I just want to say, yes,
Okay.
I'm totally on your side. I want
Okay.
that too.
I don't want a corporation taking over, and that's my fear.
Well, it might be a corporation.
Well, okay, but you know what I mean. I'm
I know.
talking,
I know.
Jelly Belly corporations.
Yeah, yeah.
So how do I do that? What do you mean I don't? I want to.
How do you do that? Well, you can put in, you can put things in the ordinance that prioritize local ownership.
Okay.
You could put in, you could put in pretty robust requests about who owns this company, who are, if you took the draft regulations that came out from the Bureau.
The ones that are going to be null and void in 2 weeks, those? Because I did read through those and
Yeah, well, they
comments.
are, but they aren't, right?
Okay.
They are technically revoked because that law was repealed.
Yeah.
But those are going to be the regulations that again get implemented unless the new statute requires some other tweak, and there
Okay.
aren't a lot of places where that's the case, or public comment precipitates a change. But for the most part, those are gonna end up being the rules.
Okay, good, okay.
Yeah, so for those in the ownership section about how an operator provides information to the regulator about all of the various financial interests, you could put something like that in your application process, so you can really vet that. And to the extent that it's a discretionary process, you can decide which companies you want to be in your communities. I suppose there's nothing that would prevent you from, I don't want to misspeak on this.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
As a local jurisdiction, you can limit how many dispensaries and cultivators, you can limit their square footage, you can limit whether or not they hold licenses for more than one type.
Okay.
So
Yeah, well, that's definitely true within the county, you can definitely do that,
Yeah.
for sure. The reason I paused for a moment was whether and to what extent you could say only an operator, you can't own, 3 other dispensaries other places in the state.
I
Or you
probably can't go that far. I'm just,
Yeah, I don't know if
I
you
just
can do
want to
that.
take care of Solano County. I appreciate it. I
Yeah.
don't want to take everybody's time, but that is my big concern.
Yeah, oh, you can absolutely do
Because
that.
we're talking money here, and you know
Sure.
that's just going to bring people in. And I want to make sure my constituents have a job.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Thank you guys for
Awesome.
being,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah. supportive.
And I think we've only got time for 2 more questions, but yes.
So I wanted to address, hi Patricia, Alameda County Board of Supervisors. So I wanted to address what you said because I am from Oakland, right, and the Bay Area. And a couple of things to the person who was asking the question, and I think you sort of touched on it. You're right, we don't have any issues, really, any problems with our dispensaries, with our cultivators, and to your point, yes, cultivation has been here and people have had cannabis for quite some time, not a surprise. But the real issue is a matter of snitching. Before, operators were very pissed off that others were doing this business in a bad way and making the business bad for them. And they couldn't go to law enforcement either. So what you have happening now is the industry saying, thank God, because now we don't have to snitch per se. There's a hotline number we can call and tell that person to get out. Because truly operators are really going to feel this because as we all know, they're going to be ag employers, more taxes, employee taxes, payroll taxes. They're not going to want that illegal person over there and not having to do what they're doing. So you can imagine the sheriffs won't even need to do any work. It's going to be the industry people. Trust me, it's going to be them who want the other ones out of it because now the scales of balance really will flip on that, right?
100%.
The other thing I wanted to raise is that what we see in Alameda County, because we have a little bit of it all, right? We have our little urban areas, we also have our agricultural areas. It really does matter that we regulate and regulate and regulate, but the truth that we want to also get out is that this is not a magic panacea, right? Simply because we're regulating and doing everything we can do, still, with any industry, there's always going to be a level of people who are trying to live below the radar, right? So it's going to be a constant situation where we're constantly checking, and every time we build a mousetrap of regulation, there's going to be criminals trying to build a mousetrap outside of that. And that's going to be in every facet of this business. I'm also on tech policy. We're constantly having people trying to get around that as well, as they will try to get around track and trace, illegal certificates, things of that nature. So nothing is different about this business versus any other business. It's going to be a new book of business in California, and we're going to see these growing pains and these holes. We're going to go, oh my God. I can remember when we ran out technology, we thought about everything. And then 3 years later, we saw people online human trafficking. We're like, oh my God, we didn't think about that. That's going to be the same thing here. There will be things that we just did not think about that the criminals always do. Thank you.
Mark, Contra Costa County. So question, many of our cities are going to prohibit all or most types of cannabis businesses, and so we're worried that with a small number of dispensaries to meet the demand, it's going to create a lot of traffic. So one thing that's been discussed is an appointment-only model or a delivery-only model for dispensaries. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know of a couple of cities that are considering delivery-only models. I think that delivery complements dispensaries well, and you've got a prime example here of why people do want to go into a dispensary often, but definitely, you know, if you anticipate wanting to have a limited number of storefronts, you don't want people driving all over all the time, and so I think a delivery model is, I mean, and in full disclosure, I represent a delivery software company, so I am going to say that, but we've seen that throughout the state, that those two complement each other well.
It's a step in the right direction, but it still isn't what consumers are asking for when they passed both Proposition 216 and Proposition 64. They asked for, you know, a regulated store that they can go into and receive the education they need, the time with the people they need, a variety of products. I have thousands of products. I can't take all my products to someone's house and show them all to them and explain everything to them and spend the time with them that I can when they come into the dispensary. And really, if you have a highly regulated environment and you go through a conditional use permit process, you can have a great dispensary in Contra Costa County, or multiple. Obviously, you know, I recommend having multiple because everybody has a different business type and a different way of communicating with their patients or with their consumers, and patients and consumers deserve choices. So I feel like it's a step in the right direction, but it's not good enough.
Last question.
Karen Adams, Merced County Treasurer Tax Collector. Yeah, our sheriff just, he's proudly boasts, they just took down 27,000 plants, so it's in Merced County. We have Merced County Sisters of the Valley on the front of the Wall Street Journal. So when you have a board that's split and thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't do anything, and you would like to see a proactive, thoughtful, mindful process rolled out, and then you hear Colorado say, well, do what you do best. If you're agriculture, do agriculture. And it is a daunting process. How would you be able, and I hope there's a way you could structure some kind of ordinance and some kind of voter measure that could roll out the ag, maybe moving into some testing or processing and the dispensary and delivery services too. So anyone in the consulting or the legal area that have had experiences with the struggle of a county that doesn't know, let's do nothing, but it's here?
Well, that's every county.
Well, yeah.
Really.
But a lot of them are being thoughtful and proactive.
Sure, yeah.
And some are on this hold and hover. And I'm a tax collector. I mean, what could I do best,
Well, I mean, I'll just say, I've seen both counties and cities do processes where they have 3 meetings and they invite the industry in to talk, they give them 4 minutes each to talk, and each meeting has a subject matter area, so then you can just hear from the industry. And they're public, the public can talk too, and that just starts out the process of getting everyone comfortable with the language, because frankly, people don't even know the language to talk about sometimes, and a public process, I think, is a great way to start.
Another great way to start is with the tax initiative. And you can gauge the public on, if the tax initiative passes, then they do want to tax dispensaries or cultivation or manufacturing, whatever they want. And obviously, as a tax collector, if the tax initiative passes, that makes you very happy. But it also gives the supervisors an understanding that the public wants to collect taxes from this. It is there, so if they're not regulating it and taxing it, they're not collecting taxes, and money from the general fund is having to be spent on enforcing these unregulated businesses, whether or not you have an ordinance or collecting taxes. And so I feel like in the areas that have passed taxes, it kind of helps the local city councils and county board of supervisors kind of understand that, okay, our citizens want to tax it, they want to move forward, and it's kind of like a first step. And it also gives a baseline of some money to kind of support the process.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. I wanted to give our panelists an opportunity to make any final comments. No pressure on who to start.
I don't have final comments. I might add just one more thing to the answer to you, which is I do think tax measures are great sort of temperature tests. Polling is a great temperature test. You want the public to be on board and ask a wide variety of questions of what would make you comfortable with this, and what are you comfortable with agriculture but not manufacturing. And then you get that cover for a public agency or a public group, a public body to say, we have to move forward because this is what people said. Yeah, there are a variety of ways that you can create that. You can look at how people feel, what's going on in the newspapers, not just the movement, but also the industry. I like to say, the movement has spoken. And now it's time to look at what is viable from an industry perspective, but also balanced against public safety, what you need where you are.
I guess I would have two comments. Again, we keep emphasizing this, but the education component, but being focused about that, right? Figure out who, it comes down to what is the board of supervisors going to be able to deal with, right? It's not enough, actually, that 80% of your voter base voted for Prop 64. That's not sometimes enough. It's this smaller contingents within the communities that have these particular issues. And so really being focused about reaching out to those groups and trying to bring them along. You're never going to get 100% consensus. You're not going to get everyone. There are always going to be pockets of resistance to this, but you have to be steadfast in your plan, right? Sometimes you have to just move forward anyway. But trying to educate those folks as much as possible and sort of bring them along. So again, the education component. And in that process, I would also say, let applicants or let the operators kind of know what does the county need in that regard. What do you need us to do to help with that part of the process? Because it's not the 80% that need to be convinced. It's the, whatever. It's the couple hundred that come to every meeting and make the supervisors' lives miserable, right? Not to put too fine a point on it, but I think that's what happens. And then the last point it's an unrelated point, but the last point I kind of wanted to bring up is that in terms of unregulated cultivation that's happening in residential areas, there's a good model, I think, for a way to incentivize folks to move out of those places. And I think it will help you to bring along your communities. So Humboldt County has, it's called RRR. Some of you heard about it this morning. Relocate, remediate, and I think R is regulate. But it incentivizes unpermitted, impermissible cultivation within a residential area to move to another area. They get the incentive that they're able to take the square footage that they're currently using times 4 up to a certain level, up to a certain number of square feet, and they have to remediate the area where they were cultivating, and then they get to have their, it's a ministerial process, right? It's not a full conditional use permit type thing that they need to do, but they get to move. And so it gets those unregulated grows out of the unpermitted places into a regulated spot. So for cultivation, I think there are some good ways of dealing with some of those issues. So I'll leave it at that.
And if you leave here today thinking you do want to regulate, but you're not sure how to make that happen because you're one person on a board or one person in a staff of hundreds, I suggest talking to the people you work with, so the people you sit on the board with, engaging them, seeing if they're interested, and start to talk to people within your county. And the next step is to really bring people to the board. I've seen some successful counties have private meetings that include the Department of Health, the code enforcement, the police, a number of supervisors, the industry, agricultural commissioners, bring everyone to the table, because people really are the most upset when they're not feeling that they're listened to and their voice isn't heard. Neighborhood associations, CPACs, all of them, they really need sometimes just to voice their concerns and really, have an intelligent conversation about the reality of this industry and take some time to become educated. So I just encourage more conversations and more meetings and more education and outreach to everyone in your communities.
So just want to remind everybody, we do have some products up here if you want to come up and talk to us. We're also available to answer any additional questions you have. It's 3:30. We wanted to stay on time, so thank you for being here and for your interest.